Okay, today we're going to talk about pre-mass media. All right, so remember, just another reminder on the video here, be sure you go to the list, you sign up, choose what you want, just one item per list, a book or a film. Send me an email with what that is and I will post it online so you can see then what other people have chosen. Because I want you to just choose one of those. All right? And we're going to start off slow, but then the pace will pick up. All right, so today we're looking at, again, pre-mass media. I found something in the magazine, actually, fairly recent one, January 24th. About, and look at the headline, and this is what caught my attention, of course, that's why they put it there. It said they have discovered ancient Amazons in Russia, right? That's what the headline says. Ancient Amazons unearthed in Russia. Now, and this, I don't know, to me this just seems like what we do with films, with movies, with things in sort of popular culture, we try to hype it up quite a bit. That way we get people to read it, people to pay attention to it. But actually when you go through and read it, they haven't really necessarily found Amazons. What they have found is a grave that had 4 women in it. The women were warriors, or at least they have weapons with them. But they are Scythians. Now if you know anything about Scythians, which you may or may not, I know about Scythians because the professor that I studied with had studied Scythians. And I actually, seems to me like I wrote a little article in an encyclopedia about Scythians. So knowing about Scythians and knowing that they were warriors has been known, for a long time. Scythians were considered, certainly by the Greeks, to be the most barbaric of people. They would ride on horseback into battle, and they were quite proficient at it. They could shoot a bow. Now, this is one of the things they were famous for, is shooting had bow and arrow. They could shoot it while riding the horse. So the horse is galloping, horse is moving fast. They could turn and they could shoot with the bow and arrow off of the horse and hit target. They were amazing at that. They could also move quite quickly and without supplies. And when they got hungry, one of the things they would do is cut their horse and drink the blood right from the horse for nutrition, right? And then patch it up and they keep going. This is one of the ways they can move quickly. When they killed someone, when they met their enemies and they killed them, they would actually take their skulls and they would convert their skulls into a drinking vessel, like a little goblet or whatever. So in other words, these people were considered to be brutal, barbaric, all that sort of thing. They're well known. They're well known. But what this story is telling us is that there were women from the ages of late 40s to early teens who were buried, and they're Scythians, and they had arrowheads and spears with them and riding gear. Okay? So really, all the way through, they do talk about Amazons a little bit at the beginning, how the Greeks talked about Amazons, and then they talk about these women who are Scythians, and they're saying, well, you see, maybe the Amazon thing isn't completely made up. There were women who fought. But again, it doesn't show that the Scythian women were Amazonian women. Okay? But this person, who is it? Adrian Mayer, classicist, the Amazons, says it confirms that these women really were warriors throughout their lives. That is the 4 women, I guess, in the grave. But are those 4 women Amazons? I'm just saying that sometimes what we do is we sensationalize information. This is true information. That's a true excavation. There really were Scythians. There really were female warriors that fought. The Scythians fought everybody. But are those the Amazons. So instead of saying, here's some evidence that there were Scythian women fighting and this might lend some credence to the Amazon idea, that doesn't make a good headline. So you just put ancient Amazons unearthed in Russia. Now, they did put it in little quotes, so I will give them credit for that. Little quote marks. But anyway, so we have to be careful, I guess, of what I'm saying as we go through this information, whether it is documentaries, as we're going to be looking at later on, or other films that are biographies and so forth. We tend to pick the sensational, and that becomes sort of the famous. All right. Now, one of the things as you go through this information, and we're talking about before mass media and some of the other kinds of things besides film and, say, books that can provide us with information, even visual information. One of the things that I think does a good job of that are some of the artwork. In this case, ancient artwork. In this case, ancient artwork from 701 BC. This is at the British Museum. See, I would turn out the lights, but I think you'd all go to sleep, so we'll just leave it this way. It's a little bit faded up here. But the British Museum, 701, there is a place, I've taken students on trips to England, sometimes Paris and London, and other things like that. Whenever I take people to the British Museum, I make sure they go in this room. And this room is called the Lachish room. It relates to the city of Lachish that's mentioned in the Bible. And it's about the Assyrian king Sennacherib and his attack on Israel, where he attacked fortified cities. You can see it there in Isaiah 36. Now it came to pass in the 14th year of King Hezekiah that Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. Okay? Now, one of those cities was Lachish. The reason this one is famous, I guess, for a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons is this artistic depiction. This artistic depiction of the taking of the city of Lachish was considered, I guess, by Sennacherib to be so important, or should be so celebrated, that he had this bas-relief carved. And it's longer than this room is wide. And it goes around a corner. And this was in his palace. There was a Lachish room in his palace at Nineveh. You would walk in and you could see the panels of what had happened. Okay? For example, the one that you see here. I'll turn it out for a second. It's hard to see. Okay, that's better now. But in this, if you look carefully, you can see a tower in the center. I don't have my pointer here. And you can see a lot of things like clubs or sticks. These are things that are flying through the air. As they are attacking the city, the people are fighting back. Okay? So as they fight back, of course, eventually the Assyrians are victorious, but the Assyrians brought with them a siege tower. It's in the center. The siege tower, they hauled with them and they put it together. And then they built a ramp. They went up the side of the wall of the city, and then they pushed it forward and had a battering ram on the front. And they pounded against the wall until eventually they broke through. Meanwhile, the people in the city are shooting arrows at them, throwing rocks at them, throwing torches to try to burn up the siege towers. There were more than one siege tower. And actually the siege tower had a container with water, and they would dump water onto it to try to put the fire out. Eventually they break in and they take the city. Okay? Let me see if I can just show you this. See if it's going to pop up here like I hope it does. Oh, you're not seeing that. Oh. What if I do that? You're still not seeing that. Well, okay, that's just showing the depiction of it. What should I do here? Well, we'll just stop that because that's not gonna work, I guess. It's working on my screen, but not on your screen, so that's fine. Basically, it's just a little 1.5 minute video that shows a kind of 3D thing where they're going through and they're showing you all the panels. But there's the link. You can look at it later if you want to see it. All right. Good. Now, also on this depiction, it shows what happens to people who rebel against the Assyrians. Here you see Assyrian soldiers. You see these distinctive helmets that they're wearing, pointy helmets. In fact, the city of Lachish has been excavated. They have found some of these helmets. They have found the arrowheads. They have found the sling stones. They have found the ramp that they built. So this event of the siege of Lachish, we know it from biblical records. We know it from the archaeology and artifacts that were found. We know it from the Assyrian reliefs that were there. We actually know it from some short Assyrian inscriptions that mention it. So we have all kinds of evidence for this event. But Sennacherib wanted this visual record in his palace. Why? To remind people of just what happens if you go against Sennacherib. Okay? Basically, don't do it. So anybody who came to visit him, this is what they're going to do. Now take a look at this. You see the soldiers there, right? Here's Archer. There's Archer at the top, right? They had slingers. I don't have a good picture of that one, but they had whole divisions or units of slingers with sling stones. Sometimes people think of David, that is like a toy slingshot. No, those were weapons that were used in military. Imagine if you had 100 guys lobbing or swinging with a sling stone, rocks about the size of a tennis ball coming at you, 100 of them at once, going about 100 miles an hour each. Could do a lot of damage. So they had that here. Archers, slingers, guys with swords and spears. Now this event, hopefully you're not too squeamish this morning, but this is what happened to people. One of the things the Assyrians would do to the people who rebelled or to their enemies is they would flay them. Flay them. F-L-A-Y. Anybody know what to flay means? Cut the skin off. Skin you alive. I can remember, I used to have relatives, might have been my own mother, who said, I'm going to skin you alive if you keep doing that. I'm sure your mother never said anything like that to you, and no threats of violence. But my mother did. Okay, did your mother? I don't know. That's all right, you don't have to confess. But the Assyrians didn't just talk about it, they did it. These guys are staked out on the ground with their arms apart, and then they are starting at the shoulders and they're going all the way down the back of the legs and all the way down. Anyway, doing that. Another thing that the Assyrians would do, which again I didn't get a picture for you this morning, is they would impale people. Impale. Impale is basically to take a stake, a wooden stake, sharpen it at the end. And I can see he's into this. Yeah, he's into it. And then they would take the person and lift them up and jam them down on that pointy part of the wood, right underneath the rib cage, right around near the diaphragm, and then just leave them there. And they would die slowly that way, impaled. Many people believe this was the origin of crucifixion, was perhaps related to impaling, of which the Assyrians did. They would cut the heads off. They would pile them up in piles. They would literally nail people to the wall, hang them on the walls, let birds come and get them, that sort of stuff. So these were very, very cruel people. The Assyrians also invented what I call the hand count. They would go around and cut off the right hand of all the deceased, put them in a bag, then come back later and count them up to see how many people they'd killed, to keep an accurate record. A hand count, head count. So why did the Assyrians do this? They did it for publicity. I mean, they're cruel guys, but they're doing it for publicity. Because here's what happens. If somebody rebels or somebody resists, we come to take your city and you resist us, we're going to take your city and this is what we're going to do to you. If you just surrender, it's going to go easier on you. So guess what? The next city they come to hears about the Assyrians, hears what they do, and maybe they decide, you know what? We're not going to fight the Assyrians. We're just going to surrender. Makes things a lot easier for the Assyrians if people just see them coming, open up the gates and say, okay, it's all yours. All right. So this is a visual representation, and Sennacherib had this in his palace just to remind any visiting people, don't go against me, or what happened to Lachish will happen to you. And then he carries off, he makes them all leave. You see here a camel. The people are leaving. They have to abandon the city, and the Assyrians take it over. And in fact, he did this to several of the cities. The Bible says all of the fortified cities. He eventually comes to Jerusalem, where he surrounds the city. And if you've ever heard of Hezekiah's tunnel, Hezekiah's tunnel was constructed in a very hurried fashion because they had heard what was happening, and they knew that when he came, he would try to cut off their water supply. And so they dug a a chamber, a channel that would go from the spring inside the walls of the city. So when he got there, he didn't take the city of Jerusalem. But Sennacherib says he had Hezekiah trapped like a bird in a cage. That's inside of Jerusalem. And so you can read the account of what happens. I don't want to give you any spoiler alerts. But the Bible, I recommend it to you sometime. And you should try to read it. Try to read it. And then here, this is on the same relief. It shows Sennacherib sitting, and this is a portable throne, because he's on site. I mean, he's there for the attack. He's got people fanning him. He's got a big throne here. This is not his regular throne. This is his, what he takes on the road with him. You see his footstool, which reminds me of a lot of verses in the Bible that talk about God making people his footstool. Anyway, and here they're coming before him and pleading their case. But there is a little bit of inscription up here. This inscription, there's not much writing on any of this, but here's what this says right here. Sennacherib, the mighty king, king of the country of Assyria, sitting on the throne of judgment before, or at the entrance of, the city of Lachish. I give permission for its slaughter. All right? So, artwork can be a way of conveying a message prior to mass media, prior to books and films and newspapers and magazines and things. Monumental artwork in public arenas, sometimes I guess in the palace was not really completely private. But here's another. This one perhaps Taylor will like better, since he's a Romophile. Are you a Romophile? A Romano. Well, anyway, whatever it's called. Anyway, he's worked with some Roman stuff. So here's some Roman stuff. This is the Arch of Titus, built in AD 89, AD 81. This is a triumphal arch. The Romans had a practice of building triumphal arches. These were built in order to celebrate, commemorate a great victory of a great general. In fact, for a general to get even a triumphal march, a triumphal, sort of like a big parade, they had to have documented they had killed over 5,000 of the enemy in the battle. Then they were worthy or whatever of having this big parade. The general would be in a fancy chariot pulled by white horses usually, and behind his chariot in chains would be the leaders of whoever it was they had fought and conquered. They would then parade the spoils, much like our floats. You know, we have floats in parades, like things that go by on wagons or whatever. They would have wagons full of whatever they had taken, the gold, the silver, whatever they had. So the captives would be there, the floats. Sometimes they would have a kind of model on a movable model that showed how they took the city, or if they set it on fire, they would actually set the model on fire and pull it through the streets. To the crowds, and the crowds, of course, would be cheering the general. They would be throwing things at the enemy, right? Humiliating, probably spitting on them and things like that. And then, of course, all this would culminate with those leaders being publicly executed for the crowd. Okay? Again, this was publicity. It was to encourage generals to fight for Rome and to fight heartily for Rome, encouraging their because also parading in it would be the soldiers, the army of the general would also be in this parade, getting the cheers. So this is to encourage soldiers to obey their generals, encouraging them to carry out their orders, encourage the generals to carry out the will of Rome. But it's also publicity to any enemies of Rome. You rebel against Rome, the Romans will defeat you. And when the Romans defeat you, it's not going to be a nice day. So, this commemorates Titus. What was it that Titus did that might deserve a commemoration like this in AD 81? He is later emperor, but he's not emperor at this time. Who is the emperor at this time? Anybody know? Who is emperor before Titus? I know it's not a Roman history class, but I think some of you have had Roman history class with me. Maybe just one, two, I don't know. Well, there are three emperors that are called the Flavian emperors. I call them the Flavians. They wore giant sundials on a gold chain. No, they didn't. I'm just making that part up. Yes, Taylor. Vespasian, then his son Titus, then his son Domitian. Okay, those are the Flavians, the Flavians. So, all right. So, Vespasian, you might remember, had been sent to Israel to put down a rebellion of the Jews. The Jews were causing a lot of trouble. They were rebelling against Roman authority. This could not be allowed. So the Romans sent their armies, their legions, and in particular, Vespasian comes into this and begins defeating the Romans. Now, during that period, we don't have time to talk about it too much, it was the year of the four emperors. Nero dies. They go through a succession of other emperors, and we'll see that eventually it's called for that Vespasian become emperor. So he needs to go back to Rome and begin his duties as emperor. So he leaves his son, who was already there with him, but he puts his son in command of the putting down the rebellion. His son does finish the job. He takes out the rest of the Jewish forces. He takes the city of Jerusalem by force. He destroys the temple in AD 70. Remember that? Well, you probably heard about that in some class, right? And the temple is destroyed. Now, as a remembrance of that, this arch is built. It's in the Roman Forum. So if you ever go to Rome, you'll undoubtedly go to the Forum. You will see this arch there. Inside of it, one of the most famous panels. If you're coming at it from the Colosseum and you enter the arch, it'll be up and on the left-hand side. All right? If you're coming from the other way, you know, from the museum, that sort of thing, it'll be on the right-hand side. But take a look at this. Do you see the menorah? Right? You see the menorah, you see the trumpets. If you know anything about what was in the temple, you know that there were lampstands, candlestands, there were trumpets, there were other items that are made of gold. These are the items from the temple. And in fact, it's hard to, you know, these little panels here actually say that's what they are, but you can't, I don't have a close-up of those. At one time, this was all painted. This is the other thing it probably would surprise us about most of Greek, Roman, and Egyptian large public buildings. We think of them as being gray or white or something, but they weren't. They were all painted very vivid colors, reds and blues and oranges and stuff like that. So this was all painted. And that inscription basically is talking about the legion, and it's talking about the spoils from Jerusalem. So, again, this is put there. Well, yes, it commemorates what Titus did in 70, but it also says in that parade in Rome, this is what was paraded by the people. Certainly they had some, if you know, any of them were still alive. A lot of the Jews had a practice of taking their own life before they were captured, so they could avoid some of this humiliation. But the spoils going to through the streets and come into the possession of the Romans. All right. So sometimes people ask me, what happened to all the goods from the temple? Where do you think they are? I said, well, they all got sent to Rome. Now, some people don't like that answer, but I think it's pretty clear. Anyway, many more of these we could talk about, other triumphal arches. You know, there's the column, Trajan's column, and so forth. But here's another way of thinking about it. This painting, I tell you its name, The Money Changer and His Wife, 1514, oil on a painting, on a panel painting, Flemish Renaissance artist, originally in Antwerp, Belgium, now, of course, in Paris at the Louvre. Now take a look at this painting. What do you see? What is your eye drawn to? This right here, this down at the bottom? Yeah, that is, and what do you see there?
Someone opposite.
What's that?
She said the window and someone opposite, the money changer.
So you think that's a person right there? Yeah. That could well be the artist painting this. But then look at the window behind it. Now, okay, so that's one thing you see. What else do you notice in this? So we notice this. What else?
Outside the doorway.
Okay, back here in the corner, the right corner. There's a couple people there. We can see. It's kind of hard to see, but I can see a couple faces and a door. That's showing you, well, that perhaps they have an inner courtyard. It's hard to tell. But yes, there is a door. There is a window. Okay, what else do you notice? We're catching a lot of details. That's good. Anything else kind of a focal point for you of the painting? Yes?
The woman's, the color that she's wearing, it's like a very bright red.
Her dress, her attire here, right? Okay. This. It's very bright. Yeah, these, we probably don't know it, but these are quite fancy clothes for the time, okay? These are not what a poor person would wear, either what he's wearing or what she is wearing. You can even see something like a pin, the pin in this scarf. Do you see that? Anyway, which again looks like it maybe has a jewel on there. It's a gold pin. It's kind of holding her stuff together up there in her hair. I don't know. But anyway, that's obviously there on purpose. But we haven't mentioned some of the other pretty obvious things in the painting. Yes?
They're measuring the money.
Yeah, they're counting it and they're weighing it, right? And look at the money. It's just laying there all over the place. This is a lot of money. This is probably more than a year's wages for most people. Just laying there on the table. It's not even sort of stacked up. It's sort of thrown there pretty carelessly. And this guy's sort of weighing it out. Sort of figuring, let's see how much money I got. Let's take a look. And what about the woman? Yeah.
The fact that she has a book indicates to me she's literate, which would
Right.
have been normal for
A literate woman, and it's a book. Now, it's not just any, books were very expensive, but this book in particular, take a look at it. It has color illustrations. Do you see that? Paintings up in the corner, and this whole page is a full illustration. All that had to be painted by hand. The whole book had to be written out by hand and decorated by hand and then bound by hand. And she's just flipping through it like she's looking through a magazine. See, it's not like this is really something special to her. It's kind of like, let's just look at the book today. Yeah, look at the nice pictures. Yeah, this is a good book. I like this one. And notice they have more books back on the shelf. Whoops, what happened? There it goes. They have more books up on the shelf. And they actually have shelves with items on them. Extra stuff. Glass, a vase of some kind or jug. They've got candle stands. They got books. They got who knows what all that stuff is. Papers rolled up there. In other words, they're showing they got lots of possessions. Now, who do you think, or why do you think this painting was painted?
I'd say it was probably commissioned
Commissioned by whom?
by the money changer.
Yeah, this is what I call a Renaissance selfie. This was staged. This was to be advertisement that they are wealthy, that they're so wealthy they can get a guy to come and paint it, and then they want to make sure that they're on the ground floor. They got a window right to outside. That's the most expensive place to live. They got all kinds of possessions. They got illustrated books. They got money. They got fancy clothes. And this undoubtedly was going to be painted and placed somewhere in this nice house to let everybody know they had arrived. All right, a lot more we could say there, but let me just do this before we close. This is a book that I like. It's called Motel of Mysteries. And it sort of pokes fun at what we do with ancient things. So the whole premise of the book is, as you're going to quickly figure out by looking at it, it's Las Vegas, but in like 2,000 years in the future. And in archaeology is sort of making parallels with the discovery of King Tut's tomb. So you see they call it Tutankhamun Motel. They're called a Motel of Mysteries. So here is the guy, they say, on some kind of a worship plane. He has a communication device in his right hand. He's communicating with this device up on the counter here. That's to the gods, okay? And then in the other room, they find a priestess who is in the midst of her ceremonial ablutions, her washing before she does her priestly priestess functions. Notice, and they've labeled it all like archaeologists would. And this is the sacred vessel here. And then eventually, this is how they reconstruct it. That she's a priestess, and across her forehead says, "Sanitized for your protection." And she's wearing her headdress there. Well, this is just for fun, but it shows us that there's a lot of information out there that we can find from objects and from things that are there, but we may not always interpret them correctly, right? So as you go through your various topics for this class, and especially, say the song that's coming up or the poem, keep in mind these are things of popular culture which have now entered into what people think. And so we'll leave it at that for now. All right, take care.